Good morning to you. I'm Alexan Balekian. An action-packed hour ahead. Please join the conversation on Twitter at RealAlexan. Use the hashtag SundayMorningMatters. Along the way, a meet and greet with all 5 candidates looking to win the vacant District 2 seat on Fresno City Council, and Mayor Brand hoping it up with a local NBA star. But we begin with some confusion at the state capitol.
So do you need a real ID to purchase ammunition?
Yes.
In October?
No, in July, you will need that ID. In the absence of that ID, you'll have to provide the same documentation that otherwise would provide the Department of Motor Vehicles. But that is a requirement.
Just minutes after Governor Newsom stumbled through the real ID question there when purchasing ammunition that is going to start Monday, the state DOJ said you will not need a real ID, just your regular license with any further documentation. So California becomes the first state to have background checks on buying bullets. But the confusion and frustration setting in on what gun owners need to provide at the point of purchase. So let's try to really sift through that mess and some other hot button issues with State Senator for District 8, Andreas Borgeas. How are you, sir?
It's great to be back on the show, Alex.
Absolutely. Good to see you. So really, real ID, gun ammo. You need that real ID to purchase now starting Monday. But the governor says you need it. The state DOJ says, well, you don't need the real ID just yet. Starting in 2020, you'll need it. Really, what is going to happen on Monday for those who want to purchase bullets?
Well, I think there will continue to be a good amount of confusion. I think if anyone has taken a trip and gone through the airport, the idea of the real ID versus the one that we've been using in California, that's been the subject of a good amount of controversy with how to reform the DMV and make certain that individuals have the appropriate identification to travel without having to use their passport. So the short answer right now is that it's in a state of confusion. But regarding the ammo sale, I believe it was 2016 that the voters approved a proposition that required background checks. And that, of course, is where you have the identification issue that is brought to bear on whether you can purchase it.
So to your knowledge, though, come Monday, will they need the real ID or not? Because the state DOJ says, no, you won't. You won't need any further documentation. You just need your regular license. We'll perform the background. Something else.
All right, so let's make certain the folks in the audience are appreciating, or those viewing, appreciate what the difference is between a real ID and the one that exists right now. A real ID is premised on advanced documentation being provided to the authorities that evidence your identity. And the older version would allow for a much more liberal standard in terms of the documentation needed. So I think the issue at the federal level is that they distrust California's form of identification, and we're in this period of flux. So the answer is no one seems to know, but that's not necessarily uncommon when you roll out a new regulatory framework or new legislation. It's going to go through its period.
But California had since 2016. Prop 63 was passed back there.
You're absolutely right.
Why would we have this?
Are you saying that Sacramento should not be dysfunctional?
I'm not saying that. You're more than welcome to say that.
It certainly is. Sacramento has its strengths. It also has its frailties and flaws. I think one of the things that we did this past week, I'm on a joint committee with Assemblyman Jim Patterson, and we were trying to make certain that the idea of putting an audit on for the DMV,
right.
And this is exactly what is important for us to make certain that our procedures and protocols are looked after, and right now they're not. People are dissatisfied with the DMV in almost every respect.
We could talk about that all day, but I want to get to a lot of issues here. A big win for Governor Newsom, if you will. The Supreme Court blocking President Trump's request to add that citizenship question on that 2020 census. How much of a difference will it make at the ballot box in California, maybe here in the Central Valley in 2020?
My understanding is that this issue is not done.
It's not done, but it's a win, would you say?
It's a temporary one for Newsom. The two big takeaways from the Supreme Court, of course, we had the census issue, and then, of course, we had the gerrymandering issue. The gerrymandering issue is that it will be left to the state authorities, that the Supreme Court has weighed in, that this is inherently a political question. And for those who are not don't have a background in law,
Right.
the Supreme Court, when they say it's a political question, that means it's excluded from the judicial process. So they are punting this out of the federal system and into the state. And for those states that have a majority or supermajority of one party, will continue to control the lines that are drawn through the 2020 census. Now, the question of whether or not an individual has to identify that they are here legally I think is going to come back to the Supreme Court at some point, and they will hopefully make a decision on that issue. But each side is trying to make calculations and preparations for whatever eventuality turns out.
I want to get to this because we've seen that horrible issue, or image, I should say, of the father and the 23-month-old baby on the Rio Grande. We saw that. It's become nationally a war cry, if you will, for immigration. But here in the state of California, what is actually being done as those immigration raids were postponed in San Francisco and L.A.? What's being done?
Well, funny you mentioned that. This is going to air on Monday, so this will have been last week. The Senate approved a resolution that is encouraging the federal authorities to make certain that ICE officials do not use any ulterior representation, meaning they should appear in uniform as ICE representatives, not police officers. So I think what's happening right here with the idea of immigration is that California, it has a different power block, given the supermajority the Democrats hold in the Capitol, that they are trying to find any way possible to make certain that there are carve-outs that shield local authorities from having to comply with the federal authorities. And we're seeing this, and that's going to happen. The Fresno Police Department is going to have an audit on its identification technology, specifically for the purpose of making certain there's no cooperation between the state and the federal authorities.
Moving on to wildfire proposal, the $24 billion proposal by Governor Newsom. It will be shared by ratepayers and the utility companies for the future cost of fires. But in the meantime, for 2017, 2018, the utilities are still looking to help those victims. But really, is this sensible? Because it seems like a bailout for companies like PG&E.
In many respects, it is. And I should tell you that I was appointed to the governor's wildfire committee. So we've been having hearings in Sacramento on exactly what to do and how to make certain that the PG&Es are not unfairly benefiting in excluding the liability that normally should be imposed upon them for their negligence and their misconduct. We want to make certain that ratepayers are not being held to account for the mistakes of the institutions like PG&E. So the idea is how do we balance the market demands for a investor quality area of investment, and that is the Standard & Poor's type of credit rating. How do we do that? Do we do that with that liquidity fund, or we do that with the general fund? I'm advancing the cause that we need to make certain that we look after the ratepayers and do not unfairly punish them. And those institutions that were responsible should remain responsible.
Will this pass?
It's in a state of flux. No one can answer that right now. I think we're going to be looking probably in August and maybe in the fall.
There's so much I can ask you.
By all means.
But we're out of time, unfortunately. I want you to come back soon because we have the housing crisis to talk about and higher education that you're working for as well. So we appreciate your time here.
Good to see you, Alexan.